Ladies and gentlemen, it is official. The Vancouver Whitecaps have signed Thomas Müller. The T's, the I's, the umlauts have been crossed and dotted, and now it is time to accept the reality that this is here. You know, the two little dots above the U.
That was good, Jenko.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Oliver Platt. So with that, we can talk about all the reasons why he's chosen Vancouver, finally moving on from Bayern Munich. And the sound was, well, it was very interesting, Gareth, wasn't it, to hear Thomas Müller talk about a Canadian city, a Canadian MLS club like this. It's not something we're really used to, and it really brings the Vancouver Whitecaps into a new stratosphere, doesn't it?
Well, I think we're used to hearing this sort of thing when it comes to Toronto FC and CF Montreal, but this is a new experience for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and a couple of things stand out after the initial content was released. First, Thomas Müller is just such a likable guy. Like the smile, his presentation, he makes you feel like this is really going to work out. And based upon his resume and everything he's done over his career, there's great confidence in that. Even more so, it was more about Axel Schuster and his comments, speaking to the sporting project and what they have to do in order to bring a star player to the club. And from what I know, they've reached out to a number of different people to figure out what can make his life easier, to the point where, him being Thomas Müller, to the point where the way that he's coached, the expectations of the way that they'll play on the field, the way that he will fit in, the off-field stuff. It's very complicated when you bring in a player of this magnitude to a place that doesn't have a whole lot of experience to it. But now when you look at that sporting project, and Schuster and Sorensen clearly played a big role here, Thomas Müller still wants to win. And that's where now there is something new for the Vancouver Whitecaps. There is eyeballs going to be on this club like never before, and the expectation is that they're going to go out and win. Not just the Canadian Championship this year, but compete for the Supporters' Shield, and then potentially go on and win MLS Cup. That has never been a realistic expectation before, no matter how much other people wanted it to happen. So there's going to be internal expectations coming from a player like Müller, who all he has done is win, and he's going to expect to do the very same here with the Whitecaps. And for the club in general to go on and show that they belong right at the top of Major League Soccer. So it just brings the Vancouver Whitecaps to a completely different place where they've never been before.
Well, and the fact that those are the expectations now, and this is the conversation we're having, is absolutely remarkable given what we thought this year could be for the Vancouver Whitecaps coming into it when the club was put up for sale. Like we've talked about Thomas Müller and the impact he could and will have to no end over the past week. So I want to talk a little bit about Axel Schuster and the job he's done this year, which I think is pretty remarkable, and potentially one that, certainly the Vancouver Whitecaps fans, but even I think wider Canadian soccer may owe a debt of gratitude to this guy for the work he's done since this club was put up for sale, and in a situation where it would have been very easy for this club to drift potentially towards a future that wasn't in Canada. We know there are still no guarantees there, but I think what they've been able to accomplish over the past few months to give themselves the best possible fighting chance of securing an even better future in Vancouver with a new stadium, I think owes a lot to the work he's done. Like when you look at some of the decisions he's made, I think he already would have known before December, and they said that the process had been undergoing for a few months in terms of putting the club up for sale, knowing that was coming. To make the coaching change he made, which was a risk because Vanni Sartini was incredibly popular. You take a gamble on someone who's never coached in MLS or outside of his home country. That has paid off massively. You make a run to the CONCACAF Champions Cup final, knocking out Lionel Messi in the process. You're near the top of the MLS standings with real expectations that you could be an MLS Cup contender. You're the favourites, obviously, once again to win the Canadian Championship. And now you make a signing like Thomas Müller, all while all of that off-the-field stuff is happening. Plus, your best DP, your best player, has barely played this season in Ryan Golds. You have two key players who are on the season-ending injury list, including your captain. Like, it's pretty unthinkable the way this Whitecaps season is unfolding, given all the circumstances that have been thrown their way. And I think their top man, I can't remember what his title is, president, chief executive, Axel Schuster, like he's just done one of the best jobs I've seen in MLS in recent years to get them to this point. I think he deserves enormous credit.
Can I add a couple more into the equation? Selling on Vitae, a move that you're like, what's going to be the corresponding move? And having to make all of these moves on a limited budget as well. Like, this isn't an Inter Miami situation where you can bring in said star from wherever, not having any domestic players in your starting 11. There's been Canadian players who have been critical and played critical roles a part of this club as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm echoing Oliver Platt's sentiments here. It's required some patience in Vancouver, but what Sorensen and Schuster have been able to execute here this season has been truly incredible.
Well, Ollie, Axel Schuster called this particular signing, bringing in Thomas Müller, transformative. What type of transformation are they hoping to see here?
Well, I think it's some of the things we always talked about there being real conviction that this club can not just make the playoffs and kind of be there, at the beginning of the playoffs, but can actually compete for the major honors in MLS, which I just don't know, even in the past couple of years, if you've ever really gone into the MLS playoffs with the Whitecaps believing that they could win MLS Cup. I think you've believed that maybe they could have a run, they could have a shot at it. That hasn't really panned out. They've always fallen quite early to the bigger teams in the league. Now they feel like one of the big teams in the league, at least for the time being, in terms of the roster they've assembled, the football they're playing, and obviously their accomplishments in CONCACAF leading the way for that. I'm looking at that Western Conference, and the match that I want to see in the playoffs, and kind of what feels like the two big hitters, although they're not the only ones, is LAFC versus Vancouver. And that's always in the past been a matchup that has felt very heavily tilted towards Los Angeles. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. And it's that kind of level of belief and conviction that a signing like this gives you beyond what they've already accomplished this season that I think is the transformative effect. And then obviously there is the longer term here as well in terms of, reiterating the importance of this club to the city and why they deserve to have their own stadium and a proper future in Vancouver, which is even bigger than an MLS Cup.
That's what I was going to say. Transformative. It may be if they can get that stadium project over the line, which will inevitably keep the club in Vancouver. But it's a difficult one to make. One player having that kind of impact, I mean, they need to follow through with a victory. That would be transformative in terms of results. But can we now expect the Whitecaps year in, year out be considered alongside the big hitters across Major League Soccer? Or is this rather a one-off, an opportunity for a very good team to take things a step forward at a time where they need a little bit of good pub off the field as well in order to ensure that the club stays in the city long-term, whichever indication right now is that it will. So look, it's very difficult in order for the Whitecaps, a world-class city. It's beautiful. There's a passionate fan base there. It's a great place to be, but the dollars and cents are much different in the Pacific Northwest, in Vancouver, British Columbia, than they are in a media market like Miami or Los Angeles, who brought in Rodrigo De Paul and Son Heung-min in the recent days as well, and the attentions that they get and the knockout on effect in terms of dollars and cents. For a Canadian club to be paying American dollars for all of their player salaries and expenses of the like, it's not exactly a level playing field. So for this to be transformative, like, do they continue to spend big? Is this a one-up? Like, that remains to be seen. So yeah, it can be transformative if it leads the club to a better place in terms of a new home. And of course, going on and achieving something they've never done before. But for this to be the new way of doing business for the Vancouver Whitecaps, I'm not quite sure that's going to be the case.
All right, Thomas Müller is expected to arrive in Vancouver this Wednesday. That is August the 13th, which is ironically the same day that the Whitecaps are playing in the Can Champs. So no Müller to Hamilton, unfortunately. Reports have him likely playing his first game at home versus Houston on August the 17th.